Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the NSCAC Presents Behind the Bench. Today, our topic of discussion will be the Toronto FC Academy curriculum and methodology. We have a special guest, and it's a privilege to have Anthony with us today. So, Anthony, welcome. Good afternoon. How are you today?
Great. Thanks, Valerio, for the invitation, and welcome to all the people on the call. Thanks for being here.
Perfect. So my name is Valerio Rocca, and I'm the Vice President of the NSCAC. Today we're going to be talking about the curriculum and methodology at Toronto FC. Anthony, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came into being the Academy Director at the Toronto FC.
For me, it was a long journey, I want to say. I started as a volunteer with Toronto FC in 2009, and I just wanted to be around the environment to learn more as a young coach and to understand how things work at the professional level. And things kind of snowballed from there, and I was offered an assistant coaching position with the senior academy at the time. And I've held multiple roles within the club, both on the assistant coach and head coaching side of multiple teams. In 2018, I transitioned to assistant academy director, and then in the summer of that year, made the full transition to academy director. So it's my third year in this role.
How are you enjoying it so far?
It's been great. I'm very fortunate to be working with a fantastic staff, specifically the coaches that work with us in the academy. And really what we've done is created a learning environment where all of us are doing our best to be the best versions of ourselves and to best serve the club in terms of what we learn and what we're able to apply. And so from that perspective, it's been great. And I coach one team in the academy, which are the coaches. And I'm really enjoying working with them.
For those of you that have any questions, we'll be more than happy to answer them throughout the presentation. Anthony has a presentation with us. If you want to pose a question, please either use the chat section of the Zoom call or the Q&A section, and we'll try to answer as many as we can as the session goes through. Anthony, take us away.
Thanks, Valerio. So I'm just going to do a presentation here on our curriculum and methodology. Anytime I'm asked to speak or give a presentation like this, I always have a preface before I begin and say, you know, this is one way of doing it. It's our way. It's unique to TFC, but it's certainly not the way in terms of player development. And so I'm happy to share what we do a little bit with the audience that we have today, and certainly happy to answer any questions that you may have. So I'll start with this quote here from Michael Jordan. It's a great quote. And the question at the top says, you know, what does your development program look like? And really what we're talking about here when we talk about curriculum and methodology, these are fundamental aspects of your program. And really it's used as a springboard from which your players will develop. So if those things are tight, they're sound, they're comprehensive, detailed, thought out, your players are only going to get better, right? But really it comes down to the fundamentals of your program. And today we're going to speak specifically about curriculum and methodology. I thought it was a great quote from Michael Jordan. And so we talk about the best conditions for learning. I've kind of alluded to it already, but now we're starting to get a little bit into our philosophy of player development. And the first thing that we need to speak about when we talk about this subject is the leadership, right? So within any program, this is the person or group of people that are responsible for setting forth the vision, the philosophy, what the mandate is going to be, and making sure that that's clear for everyone within the organization or the club. Once we have the leadership in place, now it's about the coaches. And I'm going to use the word teachers when I refer to coaches, because these are the people that are responsible for executing the vision, right? Our players are going to have the most contact with our coaches, and it's going to be up to them to deliver the content, the information. And obviously curriculum and methodology are very much tied to that. And now we can talk about creating the environment. And really for us, it's about creating the best environment for learning. And when we talk about curriculum and methodology, obviously it's tied to the environment that the players are in on a daily basis and the information that they're receiving and the amount of learning that is taking place, right? That is tied to the environment. Once we have that, now we can start talking about influencing the behaviors of our players and even their habits in terms of longer term projection. But we're not in the business here of trying to change people's personalities, right? What we're after is influencing the behaviors and the habits of our players that are consistent with a high performance environment. And obviously for our purposes, meeting the mandate of transitioning players to the professional game. And when all of these things are in place, now we can talk about true player development, right? But this is the structure that we speak about when we talk about the best conditions for learning. And I'll speak a little bit about how we implement our curriculum and our methodology in this framework. And so a little bit more about the environment that we try to create. You see the two images that are on the screen here. And I'll qualify this for everyone on the call. So when we talk about equality in the true sense, no injustice, an environment that is free from any type of harassment, racism, this type of stuff, clearly that exists, right, in our environment. We create a safe environment where there's respect for everyone. But when we're talking about it from the soccer perspective, we're not looking to create an environment that is based on equality. It's more based on equity, right? And there's a distinction that needs to be made between these two things. So when we talk about equity, we talk about giving players what they need in order to be successful. And so you can see the image on the right here, which is much different than the one on the left, is on the left, we're treating everyone the same, right? And if we were to do this in the academy in terms of our curriculum and how we approach things, it would be the wrong approach because obviously individuals are different and they have different needs as players. We strive for an environment of equity, right? Which means now everyone is getting what they need and the focus is really on the individual player. We're not in the business of promoting teams forward, right? Our mandate obviously is to get players forward through our pathway and into our first team environment. And we need to be able to understand what the nuances are for each player at any given time in terms of their stage of development. So it's about creating this environment of equity in the academy. And when we talk about curriculum, we talk about starting with the end in mind. So I'll just give this example here of one of our recent academy players, Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy, who signed a contract with the first team literally a year ago, so February of 2020. And for our purposes, it's always about what does this particular player need in terms of his development and understanding of the game to be able to be considered to be signed by our first team. And so if I take my academy director hat off for a moment here, I would say what all of us would have said in the academy, that we all hoped that Jaquil would have played for the first team one day, right? Now, if I put my academy director hat back on, what I would say is hope is not a method for developing players. And if we're using hope as our method, then we've got a serious problem with the way we're running our program at TFC. So we definitely don't look at hope. We talk about development by design, not by chance. So again, being very, very purposeful, intentional with what we're setting up in terms of what the content is, how the curriculum is delineated, and what aspects we're teaching to our players, right? This is not a random thing that we're doing. It's development by design and making sure that we're purposeful in what we're doing. And so I ask this question here, what do players absolutely need to know? And I'll draw a comparison with a very simple skill, which is reading. I think everybody on this call would agree that reading is an essential skill. And so here's the question here. What happens to kids who can't read? Well, I think the answer is pretty self-explanatory. They are going to struggle in life. The very same thing can be applied in a soccer context. And we can ask a similar question. What happens to kids who can't pass the ball? Well, they're going to struggle in soccer. And you can replace pass the ball with whatever skill you want to think of. Could be heading the ball, could be building more awareness, decision making at any given age, right? if they don't have the prerequisite skills, they're going to struggle in the sport of soccer. And this is why the curriculum and the methodology is so important in making sure that the players have what they need in order to be successful at whatever level they're playing the game. And so when we talk about the academy, we talk about being a school. And really, we're no different than a school, right? We just put our logo at the top there, and that is the TFC Academy, right? We are a school. We're very fortunate to be working out of the BMO training ground at Downsview Park. And what's more important than the actual physical structure of the building is the work that's being done by the people, as I mentioned before, in the building in terms of the day-to-day interactions with our players. And I asked this question at the top, what would you expect from a top school? I typically get the same answer when I ask this question. And so really what it comes down to is being an effective teacher. And I asked the question rhetorically at the top, are you an effective teacher? If we have any coaches that are on the call with us today. I remember back in 2012, we had a coaching conference at the University of Toronto, and I invited Bob Gansler to be one of the clinicians and guest speakers. And I'll never forget this quote that he used in one of his seminars. He said, a coach is a teacher in short pants. And just take a moment to reflect on that statement there. I used to refer to myself heavily as a coach, but now I look at myself more as an educator of youth players and the responsibility that carries for me in terms of what I need to deliver, right? So it really becomes about being an effective teacher. And so as a teacher, do we know what we control, right? In this case, we're talking about coaching. And just a statement here, as coaches, you have control over the amount of improvement your players will make in just one training session. And I remember when I was coaching at the university, I remember inviting Stuart Neely, who's now the manager of coach education for Canada Soccer, who at the time was the academy director at TFC. I invited him in to run a guest session with my university group. And it was amazing how much my players learned in one session, right? They learned more with him than they did with me in an entire week. And for me, that was a wake-up call in terms of where I needed to be with my coaching, right? So it's having this understanding that as the teacher that's in front of the players, you actually have control over the amount of learning that is going to take place. And so you could be involved in a training session as a coach where there's little to no development taking place. That's tough to do. I mean, if we just look on the physical side, players are moving around, and by virtue of that, at least they're expending energy and maybe getting a little fitter. But from the soccer perspective, maybe tactically or cognitively, there could be no improvement whatsoever, right? There could be some improvement, a lot, or massive improvement. And this is going to depend on your expertise as a coach and being able to deliver a curriculum and then being very well versed in the methodology in terms of how you deliver the information, right? But if you're operating in this area here, and believe me, I've been there, where there's little to some development taking place over time, your players are not going to reach their full potential, right? We need to be working in this area here where there's a lot of improvement and a massive improvement in just one training session. And this is where we start to see the gap in terms of player development from the coaching perspective, is when we're failing our players and not offering them the instruction and creating the environment that they need in order to reach their potential. And so we've done some work with some people in the academic field, in this case with Professor Stephen Cates from the University of Toronto, and came in to work with our staff and spoke about the impact of a good teacher, right? And there's an overwhelming amount of research and evidence that clearly shows that if you have a good teacher at the front of the room or on the field in this case, that students and players, they will learn, right? Regardless of their socioeconomic background, where they live, if their parents were educated, the number one determinant of student success is having a good teacher. And so he used this quote here and said, what teachers are doing in classes with students on a daily basis will have the greatest potential to influence their academic outcome. So we took that and we kind of spun that quote and turned it into our own at TFC Academy and said, well, what coaches are doing on field with players on a daily basis will have the greatest potential to influence their pathway. And so it really speaks to what I've talked about here about us striving to become expert teachers. By no means are we experts in the academy in terms of coaching and delivery. We are striving to become experts, and we're working at that every day, again, to best serve our players that we have under our supervision. And so here's a distinction now in terms of the area of expertise of the teacher. And I use this analogy here of aviation and the pilots to explain it. And so each of these pilots has their own set of expertise when it comes to being able to fly their particular aircraft. So if we look at these two here, they're responsible for flying the hot air balloon. So they have a very specific skill set in knowing which levers they need to pull, how hot it needs to be in order to get the balloon off the ground. The same thing can be said about the pilot that's responsible for flying the Goodyear blimp. The commercial airline pilots have a specific set of skills, and then the military helicopter pilot as well. And so if we look at this in terms of age breakdown, we can look at it like this, right? Our U14 coach has to have a very specific skill set for working with those particular players in that stage of their development, right? They're going through puberty, a lot of physical changes, etc. The way he coaches or she coaches at this age is going to be distinctly different than what's happening at U19. And so it's helping our coaches understand how they deliver curriculum and methodology across the various age groups, right? It's very important. And as I said, we've done some work with some experts that we've brought in. Obviously, when we were able to do so, we invited people in to the BMO training ground to work with our staff to talk about a variety of different things, right? Here's an example of Doug Lemoff from the US that flew in for the day and ran a workshop on teaching pedagogy and providing effective feedback. We've worked with other people on the mindset of continuous improvement. We had someone like Bobby Lennox, a real gem in our community, to talk about talent identification with our group. And then another professor from the from York University talking about the adolescent brain and the neuroscience behind working with players, and again, in different stages and understanding how the brain works. And so really the mandate for us is trying to educate our coaches and giving them the tools that they need in order to work with our academy players on a daily basis. And so going back to this notion of curriculum here, I'll ask this question at the top, why is it important to have a curriculum? And I'm just going to ask some questions here, food for thought, as we go through this. Could you imagine a school without a curriculum? Right, so again, just think about that for a second. And if there are any parents on this call, would you send your child to a school where you didn't know what the teachers were teaching? I don't imagine anyone would be too keen on doing that. The same thing applies to our program. The second question is, could you imagine a school where the teachers only taught their personal interests? So I'll give you an example of this. I'm a history teacher, and I'm very well versed in the Civil War. Well, if there's no curriculum that's mandating what I need to teach, what do you think my students are going to learn? Well, they're probably going to get a healthy dose of the Civil War. Well, they're not going to learn anything about the Industrial Revolution, the Civil Rights Movement, or World War I, because I'm not mandated to teach anything, so I'm going to teach what I think is important. This would be the equivalent of a player that was a striker throughout his career or her career, and now has made the transition into coaching. Well, if your club doesn't have a curriculum, there's really nothing guiding that coach in terms of what they need to produce in terms of content on the field. And so what are your fullbacks getting? What are your center backs getting in terms of their education as a young soccer player? And finally, could you imagine a school where the teachers don't interact with one another, right? We would say this is a very dysfunctional school. And the example is, well, I'm a grade 5 teacher, and I have no idea what the grade 4 teacher taught the previous year, and I have no idea what the grade 6 teacher is teaching the following year, right? So operating a program like that without a curriculum, where there's interaction and communication between staff, where it's very, very clear as to what's being taught at the different age groups, if that's not happening, the program is going to suffer. And so a quick definition here of curriculum. We talk about a planned sequence of instruction. I've alluded to this already. This is not by accident. It's not random. There's a very planned sequence of what happens in the curriculum, right? Learning that is guided by objectives, And again, it's our task as coaches and the people that are responsible for the program to help guide the players to those objectives. And then finally, the total experience of a given program. So the curriculum has a starting point and an end point. The moment the players come under our supervision is when the curriculum begins. And the exit point for us is U19 in the academy. And hopefully they're making a transition at that point to the professional game. And so we looked at the structure of the Ontario education system when we put our curriculum together at TFC. And I'll use this as a framework to make the point, right? So education is governed by the Ministry of Education. So the province of Ontario, there's a minister in charge of that. It's Stephen Lecce currently, right? Within the Ministry of Education, there are school boards. So TDSB is an example. Within the school board, there are schools. Northview Collegiate is a school that we work closely with. And in the schools, they teach subjects. And in this case, we'll use the example of math. Well, when we're in grade 1, the curriculum would say that we are learning this in grade 1, right? Simple addition and subtraction. My son is going through it right now. 2 + 2 is 4, etc. When we get to grade 5, we're no longer dealing with simple addition and subtraction. Now we're dealing with fractions. We're dealing with decimals, perhaps long division. When we get to grade 8, now we're talking about equations, geometry, perhaps order of operations. And then by the time we get to grade 12 in the math curriculum, we're dealing with algebra, calculus, and perhaps advanced functions, right? The point of this is that there's a logical progression to the curriculum where we're starting with something simple and building up to something more complex as we progress. The same thing can be said now when we talk about developing an age-appropriate curriculum, right? So for our purposes, Major League Soccer is the governing body. Within Major League Soccer, we have teams. TFC is ours. Within the clubs, we have academies that are mandated. And within the academies, we teach principles of play. And so when we talk about the breakdown of our curriculum, now it needs to be age appropriate because we're not doing the same things with all the age groups across the board. So at U14, we talk about a very specific training content that is associated with this particular age group. And the coach that's responsible for U14 is, again, striving to be an expert in the delivery of the U14 content. Similarly, at U15, it has its own training content, and these coaches are working together to understand what was taught underneath and now what the progression is at U15. Same thing we can say about U16, U17, and then obviously the exit point, U19, right? Again, the idea here is that there is a progression in terms of the content that we're delivering. We talk about age-specific learning objectives, right? So if we look at the example of math again, when we talk about the math curriculum in grade 10, it's very clearly outlined what the objectives are for the student, right? So I don't need to go through all of these in detail, but the point here is that by the end of the course, the student will be able to execute or should be able to execute these particular objectives when it comes to the math curriculum. If we take soccer as our example, as our subject, right, and we talk about U14, these would be the objectives that are set forth by the club, by the academy, in terms of what the player needs to be able to accomplish. And again, this could be different based on the club that you're at and your staff coming together and coming up with the objectives and making these objectives clear for the players using a variety of different teaching tools, whether it's by video, annotation, still shots, etc., to make the objectives clear in terms of what they need to accomplish. And so this is just an example here of the weekly cycle. So when we talk about our curriculum in the academy, a typical week would look like this. We would have a game on a Saturday, and hopefully we get to a point where we're able to start playing games again soon. And so we work backwards from there. So the next day would be the Sunday, which would be a game day +1, where the players are recovering. The Monday, when they're back in for training, is still a game day +2, which means the players are still recovering from the game on Saturday. And we have to take that into consideration when we're putting our content together for our Monday sessions. And so here we talk about position-specific and essential skills based on the age group. Clearly, when we're getting to the older ages, we're talking about more position-specific. What does a holding midfielder need? What does a fullback need, etc. The younger ages, U14 specifically, we're talking about essential skills, right? Passing, receiving, these types of skills that we teach as our entry-level team with the academy. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we talk about fixed sessions. where these are principle-based sessions, right? And I'll explain that in a little bit when I show you our curriculum breakdown for our principles. On Wednesdays, we talk about our competition day. So this is where we get together in a 4v4. It could be 5v5, depending on the week. The spacing of the field varies as we go forward. But really, this is player-driven, and we look to compete. And we do this in a very formal way, and I'll show you an example of that. Friday is a game day -1, which is a flexible session. So this could be something that was based on the previous game or for the upcoming opponent. And then we play the game again on Saturday, just to give you an idea of the rhythm. And here's an example of a month. This is from one of our teams. Again, everything is outlined there. So we know, obviously, there's more detail to this, but the session content is clearly outlined there so that we know on this particular day, let's say the 7th of the month, it's going to be a fixed session and we're going to be focused on anticipate, adjust to finish, which is one of our attacking principles. So we have these calendars set up for the week, for the month, and for the year, obviously, for all of our teams. Here's an example of the academy curriculum breakdown across all the age groups. So on the left-hand side, you see the attacking principles. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see what they are. But really what I want to emphasize here is how we break it down, right? So it's not the same thing across the board. We're either introducing the principle, focusing on the principle, or maintaining the principle. And I'll use U14 as an example. Based on what we know about how players learn at this particular age, we don't want to inundate them with too much information, which is why we're looking at only 4 principles at U14. And we're introducing 2 of them and focusing on another 2, right? We're chunking information at the younger ages, and it's more of a spiraling curriculum as we get to the older ages, where we're switching from one principle to the next, right? It changes. The younger ages, when we're introducing and focus, we will take blocks of time, whether it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and focus on one principle and one counter principle. So that's how we have had things set up on the attacking side. I'm going to highlight just this one principle here, playing across the direct game channel, and just show you a little bit of how we would teach this in our academy. You may know this as switching the point of attack. We look at this with a very clear reference. So the way we define this is the direct game channel represents the fastest path from the ball to the goal. So this shaded area that you see here. And obviously the defending team is trying to occupy or create density in this area so that the team in possession has to find an alternate route to get the goal, right? They can't just simply take a straight path to the goal. And so the best teams in the world, what they'll do is stuff like this, and they'll start moving and shifting the direct game channel to different parts of the field. And what we're trying to do is play against the priorities of the defending team. This is how we think about it. And again, trying to find the best or easiest path to goal, right? And when we're able to find time and space, we can get to goal as quickly as possible. This is what it looks like. So just watch this player here, which is the holding midfielder. This is one of our U16 academy games. And so you can see that this player here is already scanning and looking and checking and knows that there is no clear path centrally, which means the space is out wide, and we're able to find a player facing forward to penetrate into the final third. That's the high-level view of this principle. And now we'll talk a little bit about methodology. And I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but you can kind of see that each methodology that we have, or each component of our training, has a very specific criteria that we're looking for, right? This could be how it's set up, it could be the coach behavior, etc., right? So all of that is clearly outlined, and all of our coaches are educated this way. So if we look at the image on the left here, this is a 4-goal game that we typically use in the academy. In this case, it's a 5v5+1 to speak about the principle of playing across the direct game channel. And so I can show you a quick animation of what we mean here. So when the ball is introduced, we have rules and constraints that affect the defenders. So in this case, they have to have 4 on one side, and we're looking to play off that side to be able to score in the opposite goal, right? So this is a game that we would see regularly played in the academy. It's a staple game. The way it's set up is done in a very objective way. And so when we have our fixed session, we know the spacing for this particular age group is a 36x24. We know exactly what the rules and constraints are for the game, and the game becomes the teacher, right? We call this the discovery game. So this would be an example of that. And here's an example of our coach in action. This is Michael Stefano when he was working with our U15 team, just to talk a little bit about the behavior of the coach and what the criteria is for him in this particular moment when he's coaching.
Tristan, can you show me what it looks like so that you have maximum time when the ball arrives? Good. What else does that position allow you to do? Okay, show me how you were positioned initially. Go back to where you were. Can you see the whole field and all the players on the field? Okay, show me a better position so you can see everything in front of you. What do you think? You have more chance now to progress or less? Play.
Okay, so they're just an example of the coach being a facilitator. Again, part of the methodology, there's no direct instruction. He's trying to engage the player by asking questions and facilitating his learning. Another example of methodology for us is cue-based technique to goals. So when we look at technique, we look at this from the cognitive perspective and trying to build relationships with players and working off very specific cues, right? Those cues will influence the behavior of players as the ball is rolling so that we can have players having the same idea at the same time. If you look at the image on the right here, here's an example of technique done by position. So in this case, we're working with the two center backs. The goalkeeper could be involved as well, and working with the midfield triangle, looking to progress the ball up the field. And again, I'll just highlight some of the criteria here that you see, these bullet points, very, very specific as to what we're looking for. So if the discovery game was the coach being a facilitator, in the cue-based technique work, we talk about the coach being the sniper, right? And being very demanding, very detailed, having the ability to demonstrate, etc. So here's just a quick animation of what we mean, the same image. So one center back playing to the other, and we're looking for a combination here, potentially between lines to connect with the holding midfielder to then be able to play across to finish on the goal. The thing is if we stay with this, we would call this a mechanical pattern if we repeat the same thing over and over. So what we suggest now is that we're working off a cue, and it's this particular player here that's going to provide the cue for the players in front. So the last image that you saw there was a pass between lines. In this case now, he's dribbling forward to try to beat the first line of pressure, and he's looking to play across now to the opposite side. We're looking to connect underneath, and there's a variety of different patterns that can come off of this. The point being is that the player is offering a cue, right, to the players in front. That's how we look at technique in terms of our methodology. Here's an example from a game. So the image that you just saw. So imagine the keeper, and here's the center back. So here's the ball being played out. He's driving into the space, and now the player has multiple options, right? He's got players in between lines. He's got a player running in depth, and he also has this pass across the direct game channel that he can play. So it's just making sure that they have choice when it comes down to technique and that our patterns are not mechanical, like I said. The tactical situation, again, unique to our methodology. So imagine a camera above the field taking a snapshot of a very specific area. And we're working with a set number of players by position, right? So these can include a variety of different scenarios that we would play out in a game. Again, the criteria is set there. I'll give you an example of what this looks like. And so this is an exercise where we have zones that are created, 1, 2, and 3, and we're looking to advance the ball to be able to finish on this goal. So in this case here, the keeper plays a 2 versus 1 scenario here. We fix the defender on one side. We're able to drive into the second zone. We're able to play across. And now we find a 3 versus 2 scenario in the third zone to finish, right? A very simple exercise. But really what we're able to do with the tactical situations is we're really able to focus on the individual player. And oftentimes our tactical situations are geared towards a certain position. So for example, while we may have 11 players that are working, the session is actually geared towards the holding midfielder or the fullback. And that's how we get this out in the tactical situation. Here's an example of another one of our coaches, Johnny Cimini, our under-17 coach. And now the coach acting as a tutor and working with the players. So a different way of teaching here.
Okay, here we go. Let's look at this now a little bit detail. Let's start breaking it down a little bit. When Marco receives possession of the ball and you step up, okay? So if he steps up to tag, if Mateo's positioning is that he cuts off Pablo and Hugo is protecting the gap, then I'm going to be playing here. If Mateo's positioning is that he decides to take off him and open up this channel and Hugo supports this, I'm going to be looking to play into Pablo's feet, okay? So now the question is, what foot does he play? Give the ball to Marco now, okay? If Pablo shows to the ball, yes, and Marco plays his back foot, Luca, I want you supporting so that you can see the ball. Good, to get a simple bounce, and now we can play out with Quasi that's receiving the ball. If we give the ball to Marco, if Marco plays his front foot and he's able to turn, okay, Luca, I want you going through. You can have the width, stay as wide as you can, and now we look to get through this way. We see the difference, yeah?
Okay, so you would have heard there Johnny making reference to if this, then. So I'll give you the Academy secret sauce if anyone's interested on the call here. So we've built essentially our style of play on this simple premise, if X, then Y. And it's inherent in our curriculum, it's inherent in our methodology and how we train our players. So basically, if the defenders do this, we have the solution. And we're very flexible and adaptable. So based on the cues and the scenarios that present themselves, we try to educate our players in decision-making and presenting scenarios that could present themselves. And then ultimately it's up to the player to make the best decision possible. But that's something that's inherent in the way we work in the Academy. I'm going to go through this a little more quicker here. I mean, everyone's probably familiar with the phase of play. Again, the criteria is set so the coach knows exactly what he needs to deliver when we're talking about phase of play. We also talk about small and large-sided games, right? So all of this, it comprises our methodology in the Academy. And again, it has to do with now which age group we're working with. So when we talk about the breakdown of the content, it's not going to be the same across the board, right? So I'll just highlight the distinction between U14 and U19, right? When we talk about U14, it's going to be heavy on the technical side. It's going to be heavy on the discovery game side. This is just a breakdown of one of our cycles, right? Just to give you an example. When we talk about U19, you can see that the phase of play is more prevalent with the U19 age group, the tactical situation, because we're focusing more on the individual. And that's really what it comes down to, is understanding what the breakdown of training needs to look like across all the age groups in the Academy. And it simply can't be the same across the board. It's got to be unique to the age group. This is just another example on the defending side. So the principles I showed on the attacking side have counter principles. So these are our defending principles that we work with. And it's a very similar process: introduce, focus, and maintain. And just to show you a breakdown of how we would set that up in terms of our curriculum and how we would deliver it. Same thing with U14. So just to use that as an example, there's certain principles that we're not addressing at U14, like intervene based on the timing of the pass to start a counterattack is something that we start at U15, not U14. And we have the 4 principles again that we're working with in that at that age group. Our competition day, again, just quickly again, as part of our methodology on Wednesdays, this is our heaviest workload, which is a game day -3, where physically it's extremely taxing on the players. But again, we organize the competition day in a very formal way with teams that rotate, the spacing changes, the number of players based on where we're at in our cycle. And we keep track of all of this, right? So the number of points, who's on the winning team. Here's an example of one of our spreadsheets from U15. And so the winning team, if you're on the winning team, you would get 4 points. If you're on the losing team, you would get 1 point. And this accumulates over time, right? So we can start to identify trends to see which players are always on the winning team, which players are on the losing team. And it makes for a very, very competitive environment because we also make this information public. We post it in the team rooms, and the players are always checking to see where they are in terms of the standings. And so I'll kind of wrap up the curriculum discussion here with this question at the top. You know, where does your curriculum document live? Well, if it lives in a file, in a filing cabinet somewhere, you don't have a curriculum, right? You definitely don't have a curriculum that's viable and that exists in real time. If it lives on somebody's laptop or a USB or somebody's external hard drive, you're not fulfilling what the curriculum is intended to do, right? This needs to live on the field. And I've seen coaches and myself included that are getting more and more savvy with the computer and presentations and even the stuff that I showed you today, right? Unless it lives in between the white lines, you don't have a curriculum. So it's extremely important that we talk about the implementation of this. And this is the most difficult part of it. So I'll use this quote here. There's no adaptation without implementation. So you could talk about curriculum, you can have your presentations all set up, but unless you're living this every day on the field and working to improve, etc., you don't have a curriculum, right? And part of this is also calling this a draft, because you're going to make adjustments. This is going to evolve. It's not always going to be the same. And you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, when you evolve the curriculum. You take what is working and you adapt and you adjust as need be, because as the learning continues, so does the curriculum development, and the curriculum will change accordingly. And so I just wanted to show you an example of our curriculum document that we have in the Academy. I'll just take a couple minutes to do that. So this would be the curriculum document that we currently have. It's a simple Excel Google Doc that we put together. And it just gives a breakdown of what we're doing across the age groups, right? So even this needs to be updated. So in the event that I needed to see something about U16, U17, I would click here and it takes me to this page here. And so now I have in front of me the U16, U17 training content. So I spoke a little bit about the fixed sessions. So if I click on this button, it takes me here. So this is a SharePoint for everybody, so everyone has access to it. And now if I look at the attacking principles, I can take the one that we just spoke about, playing across the direct game channel, and it'll take me to this page. And here it gives me a description of what the principle is. It also gives me the learning objectives for U17 in terms of what the player needs to accomplish for this particular principle. In terms of content now, if I need to see an example, let's say of the first team. So first team example of playing across the direct game channel, I simply click on the button. This will populate, which will take me to a video. And now we're able to share this information with our players, right? So in a video session, I can bring this out. I can show that an attack starts down the right-hand side. We're trying to play across the density to find a player facing forward with time and space. And now we're able to create the overload on the opposite side, right? That's an example of a video that we could show. If I want to show a training example, so what the first team was doing. So here's an example of a similar game to what I showed earlier. And this is a 5v5 and goalkeepers are being used, right? Still the 4-goal setup, but a very similar concept where we're starting on one side, we're looking to play across, and we're able to find players in these positions here to be able to finish on the opposite side. That's an example from first team training. If I need to look at the session plan, I have access to the session plan here. And so for this particular principle, for a fixed session, it's already set, right? We don't need to be coming in and reinventing the wheel when it comes to our session planning. So everything is already delineated there. We can see the methodology that's being used for this particular session. I've got a discovery game, cue-based technique, and a tactical situation. We've got the image, the expected results, the performance criteria, the layout and the spacing, the instructions, the workload, and the achievement criteria. So these are the things that we're thinking about even before we get on the field, right? And this is obviously associated with this particular principle. If I need to see an example of an animation, I can bring one up. And again, using this as a teaching tool for players. So in the 11-a-side, when we're building out of the back, based on how the opposition is pressing, now we can start to be very detailed about the movement of our number 6. And here in this case, we're talking about a counter movement on the half turn to be able to play to the opposite side, to find an overload and to advance into a different area of the field, right? So all of this is outlined in our curriculum document, and we're able to see this across different teams and be able to share the information effectively, essentially. So really, that's all I wanted to talk about today. Hopefully you took something from the presentation. Again, happy to share what we do at the Academy. Maybe you can take something into your environment, but certainly happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I have a question. We have a lot of coaches and parents on this call.
Sure.
What are some characteristics you're looking at players to join the Academy? So when you're having your tryout dates, is there certain criteria or certain characteristics you're looking at a U14, you're looking at a U15 in order to bring them into your program?
Yeah, so we have a very specific criteria for our talent indicators, and I'll share the acronym with you. It's CRISP. And what that means is we're looking for players that are competitive, players that are resilient, players that are intelligent, players that operate with speed. And there's different types of speed. There's physical speed, there's technical speed, and cognitive speed. And then the last one is presence. And what kind of presence do they have when they play? So if you follow the acronym CRISP, it'll give you an idea of what our talent indicators are at TFC.
And then you talked about the prerequisites of what a player should have. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what kind of prerequisites you're looking for? You talked about being able to pass, but we have coaches, a lot of community coaches, a lot of academy coaches on this call, and we even have parents. So can you give us a little bit more of a breakdown of what you're looking for in terms of that?
Yeah, again, I'll refer to the talent indicators. Obviously, on the technical side, we look at players in a game format. So any player that comes in with us, whether it's through the open tryout or players that are in our environment, ultimately we're looking at them in a game setting when we talk about making a decision about a player. And we're looking very specifically for these talent indicators, right? Further to that now becomes position specific. And we're looking at players in terms of what are they able to do as a fullback? Are they meeting a criteria? Because we have positional KPIs that we look at. We have metrics that are associated with our positional KPIs. And so when we're watching these games and we're immersed in that environment in the trial period, it really comes down to talent indicators and positional KPIs and understanding what is it that a winger needs to do. Well, if a winger is having problems crossing the ball, we would say that the KPI is not being met. And we would get video on this. We would do a performance criteria on that particular player in that position and see if KPIs are being met. The same thing we can say about a center back, in possession and out of possession. Are they able to pass between lines? Are they able to create a numbers up situation? This type of thing. And so we tried to be a little bit more detailed in terms of our talent ID, but really looking by position at players and what they're able to do.
When we spoke the other day, you explained that there's only one team at TFC. It's the first team. So the objective of the academy is to develop players to play for the first team. So what would you do with a player that was struggling to move on to the first team?
That's a great question. So for us, we always turn the mirror on ourselves first. And we ask ourselves the question, can we be better teachers? Are we able to present the information in a more clear way? Is there a gap in learning, et cetera, right? So what I'll say is this, just because we've taught something doesn't necessarily mean that the players have learned. And this is really where we get into the notion of knowing your players, right? And understanding how they learn and providing the best resources and tools. And again, I talk about the environment to make sure that we're doing our jobs in terms of being quality educators. So there's that piece there. If and when it comes to a point where a player is really struggling in the academy, because obviously we're in a very competitive environment, we're playing against other MLS opponents, sometimes at the international level. Sometimes when we talk about the environment of equity, it means giving the player what they need. And that could be releasing the player from the academy and giving them an opportunity to develop in a different environment. You know, that is I want to call it a necessary evil of any high performance program, that you have to do right by the player. And in some cases, it means releasing the player. But before we get to that discussion, it's always about what we can do better in helping the player along with his development, right? So for us, we look at ourselves first when we look at that.
We have another question here. It says that your progressions in your training session are introduce, focus, and maintain. And the question is that they would also add another point. It would be refine. So the progression would be introduce, focus, maintain, and refine. What do you think about adding the last component?
Again, it's specific to everyone's environment. So in another environment, it could be that they're using different terms, which is totally fine. I would say along the lines of reflection, when I think of the word refine, the real learning takes place when there's reflection, right? So after the session, after games, for us, a big part of it is being able to reflect. And when we're able to reflect, we're able to learn, and we're able to refine. As whoever asked that question, what you're referring to is the following week or in the next cycle, we're looking to adjust or evolve what we did. And obviously we're also part of the learning process as coaches when we talk about that.
Another question, what do you suggest for a U7, U8, U9 development? How do you help your child develop?
Yeah, it's a very broad question. And so in general terms, I would say at those ages, it really needs to be about fun and developing a love for the game, right? There shouldn't be too much pressure on the player at the younger ages, specifically when we're dealing with U7, U8. For them, it's really about a social experience, coming together. You know, soccer is almost a secondary thing with that, right? As we start to progress and go forward and get older, then we can talk about getting more specific, the frequency of training, the demands that are put on players. But when we're talking about 7, 8, and 9, it's for them to just be kids, have fun, and enjoy the game, develop a love for the game.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes we put too much pressure on a U7, U8, U9, and you find that they leave the game. And it's something we don't want to do at that age, because we want them to stay in the game as long as they can and hopefully be a part of Toronto FC. Another question, with the amount of time coaches, teachers, educators spend with the players, how do you monitor the fine line between coach and friend? Or what is your thoughts or Toronto FC's thoughts on this?
Yeah, we talk about a safe environment, and I spoke about that a little bit at the beginning. We want to make sure that we're being professional. I mean, we have the rule of 2. So anytime that we're talking to a player, it's always with another staff member present, and making sure that the delivery is focused on the objectives in terms of them improving on the soccer side. We obviously want to know our players better, and we work very closely with our families. We have frequent calls with our parents, and we engage with the players that way. But really just making sure that we're being professional about our delivery, the same way that a teacher would be professional in how they deal with students in a school. As I said, we draw a lot of parallels in the academy, and we function a very similar way. And so we have objectives, and in terms of our staff, we have our staff code of conduct, and all of our coaches are apprised of that, and they adhere to that. And it's something that we take a lot of pride in how we work.
My first question to you was about what kind of characteristics are you looking for a player in terms of the soccer side? Is there anything you're looking at about the person?
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole package. We look at a holistic view when we talk about how we assess our players. So it's not just simply on the soccer side. We have a category called life in terms of one of our aspects of evaluation, and we want to know how they're doing at school. We take the academic side very seriously. It's mandated that our academy players must have a high school diploma, and we work towards that together. And so really it's about the holistic approach when we talk about player development, not just simply what's happening on the field. We also know that there are other things going on in their lives that we have to take into account. And so when they show up to our training facility, we call it the backpack, and they bring their backpack with them, right? Not in the literal sense, but they carry a lot of things in their backpack, what's happening at school, what's happening at home with friends, etc. And really all of these things need to be taken into consideration when we take a holistic approach to player development.
Your last sentence, your last quote that you used was adaptation. So tell us a little bit of how you guys have had to adapt with the impact of COVID-19.
I'm sure everyone has had a lot of challenges. We're no exception. So obviously when this hit almost a year ago now, we had to pivot very quickly and enter what we call the virtual world now. And I've seen a lot of other programs operating in a similar way where we're online and we're hosting virtual sessions with our players. We're working on the physical aspect, the technical aspect. We also have a social component where we do trivia, games, try to keep everyone engaged and connected. And then we've also run theory sessions with them. So we're taking examples from games, whether it's our first team or Champions League games, and we're conducting theory sessions. And we're really getting into the nuts and bolts in a lot of detail. And under normal circumstances, we would not necessarily have this type of time to dedicate to these things. And as we talk about on our calls, there's something to be had during this period. Even though we're not on the field, we can still learn just in a different way and maybe focus on things that we normally wouldn't.
We have another question here is, how would you gauge success at the end of each curriculum?
Great question. And the answer would be, are the objectives being met? And that can't be done in an anecdotal way, right? So we can't just assume that things are being done and that because we're following the curriculum that the players are meeting the objectives. There's got to be a process in place so that we know that these things are happening. So again, I'll refer to the metrics that we use, performance analysis through video, engaging the player, checking for understanding is a big thing in the academy. So all of our coaches are educated in this in terms of being teachers in drawing information out of the players and having them either teach the group or, say the information back to us in their own words, create a project. And then obviously what we see on the field is also important. I don't want to discredit our opinions as experts in the field as well. That counts, but we need to bring in a variety of different tools to know for sure if this is working or not working, and then be able to make adjustments accordingly.
When would you recommend a player come and trial for TFC?
Well, the academy starts at 14. And so we have an open tryout that we run under normal circumstances where players can come in. But really the best way of getting involved in the academy is our relationship with the local clubs. Right? There's no substitute for that. Our relationship with coaches in the community, my relationship with technical directors. Obviously, we have a premier partnership with Ontario Soccer. And so these are the types of things that need to be in place in terms of identifying players and working together. And then, transitioning players at U14 and giving them an opportunity to participate in MLS Next, which is meant to be the highest level of competition in North America. And really doing it together, right? We definitely don't operate on an island at TFC, and without the community, we will not have any chance at being successful. So it's extremely important that we foster those relationships.
And are you taking the curriculum that you guys have designed and bringing it out to the community to have the clubs and the academies start to implement some of these things so that when the players come to you, there's already some sort of familiarity to what the expectation is within the academy?
For sure. And, we've tried to do our best with that in terms of presenting what we do. We've got nothing to hide in the academy. So very open to sharing what we do. Again, it's not the way, it's our way. And so that process has already started with a variety of different clubs that I've presented to, technical directors. Really, Valerio, anyone that is interested in learning more about what we do, I'm very open to it. So when you approached me, let's say to come on this call, very happy to be here and talk about what we do in a very humble way, because it's important that we show humility. We don't have all the answers. We're working just like everyone else in the community is working at getting better and learning. And ultimately, we're trying to develop players for our first team, but also advance the game in Canada like everyone else.
Yeah, and I appreciate you coming on, and I think we need to, and when I say we, coaches and organizations in Canada need to work closer together and better together to make the player better and to provide more opportunities for the player. I think my player shouldn't go here and it's my player. I think we need to get rid of that ideology and look at what's best for the player and what avenue should they be taking.
When we put the players first, we can't go wrong, and that's what it should be about, putting the needs of the players first. We are here to serve the club and be the best facilitators that we can be for the players' development. We create the environment, and at the end of the day, the players will develop themselves if they have the ability to play at the next level. We want to make sure we're giving them what they need.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Anthony. It was a great 1 hour, and I enjoyed every minute of it. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody out there has as well. For those of you that would like to see this again or become a member of the NSCAC and take advantage of all our benefits, please visit our website at www.nscac.ca to become a member. Anthony, thank you very much, and good luck. And hopefully we get back on the field soon so these players can continue to do what they love.
For sure. Thanks, Valerio, for the opportunity, and thanks for everyone for being on the call. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.